let you live long enough.
It's beautiful. Super Mario Bros. Z. We all know it, but those uncultured swines who don't. Super Mario Bros. Z was an animated sprite series made by Mark Haynes, chronicling the adventures of Mario and Sonic as they try to get the Chaos Emeralds before Mega Sonic, a robot that caused the destruction of Sonic's world from using him for his own malicious means. To be fair, all my dumb monkey 8-year-old brain thought of at the time was fight scene cool, me likey. But there's a lot of effort and care put into this show. Now, a lot of people have already made their own essays on why Super Mario Bros. Z was amazing, from the fights, the storylines, to the portrayal of the characters, and so on and so forth. But overall, Super Mario Bros. Z was a pioneer of sprite animation and inspiration of fan projects in general.
Alright, next tape! Hey, wait a minute, what happened? What happens next? Come on, let's see the next episode!
That's it?
What?
Due to several reasons, some personal and some not, the series ended on that infamous cliffhanger. And of course, like many, I try to find a replacement to that hole in my heart, looking at several different series and such, but that's a conversation for another day. Ever since then, Super Mario Bros. Z just lay dormant. That was until 2015, when the first episode of the reboot was published. And to be frank, when I first watched it, I did not like it. It was either because of nostalgia for the original and how it leaned more to Dragon Ball Z and just my own naive brain at the time. But I just saw it, went, and forgot about it. But then, 6 years later down the road, the second episode had passed and some things changed for me. It was then when I finally decided to make animations and even joined the reanimated collab for episode 6 of the show. And boy did my opinion change. It was amazing. Literally some of the best sprite work I've ever seen, and so I went back to the first episode and I liked that as well. I kept the same spirit of the original, and now I love to see where the show will go in the future. But why? Why did my opinion change? And what makes Super Mario Bros. Z such a good series nowadays? I'll answer that with a look through of the first 2 episodes in the reboot, and let's see what makes them tick. Now let's get episode 1 out of the way, because while it's good, episode 2 is what made me change my mind with the show and why it's amazing now. Episode 1 starts with a tournament, then Bowser invades and Mario fights him. It's fairly nice in setting up the norm of this world, as well as the general hook of Sonic and Shadow arriving at the end. Episode 1 has less changes than episode 2, but the main one here is how this is a tournament now, rather than a go-karting race in the original. And it's a nice change. It's even nice to see this dude being this world's Mr. Satan.
Amateur!
Also, nice Easter egg with Link here, but also makes me a bit annoyed to be reminded that we only got one prominent Smash Bros. Sprite series back then, but we got a billion Mario & Brothers Sonic series nowadays. Also wish the tournament felt more like Smash and less like Dragon Ball Z, but that's more of a preference than anything. Regardless, it gives a nice little transition from having a fun little fight with Wario to what Mario does on the norm. This episode does a decent job in establishing the personality of these characters right from the get-go as well, Luigi being the lovable coward he's always been, and while it's a great start, it kind of felt familiar to me. A little too familiar. But granted, episode 1 was never the highlight of the show, and it does squish episodes 1 and 2 from the original into a more concise manner. So I can't really fault much of the actual episode, and rather see it as a sign of things to come. Overall, this is fine. This is pretty good. It's a good start to this show. But while I like it, this is fine. Episode 2 is where we get good. Oh boy. Episode 2 is where things step up. It gets really good. Like really good. Reason number 1, Sonic is here, baby. He's cool, he's fast, he's the bluest hedgehog around. But also, the other reasons. This episode introduces the MacGuffins our heroes need to collect, the Chaos Emeralds, as well as the enemies that will stand in our way. This episode adapts episode 3 of the original 2006 show, and was one of the first episodes to actually draw people in. Episode 4 and beyond only gaining more and more traction over time. And it seems like history is repeating itself. It's been getting a good amount of buzz online for good reasons. But why? How did that episode play with our nostalgia and yet objectively be good at the same time? one reason why I think this works is how it's able to keep the core of its series. It keeps the iconic stuff. You know how a reboot usually copies the really cool scenes from the first film and usually it fails either way? That's usually because it doesn't feel like the original, as most people would say, but for me, it's about expanding what made that work in the first place. I would use a film example, but most reboots on the top of my head are just caca garbage, and so let's use a video game reboot as an example. This is most prominently seen in the cutscenes where they slap a new coat of paint on them and give new life to it, just as your dumb mind pretended that it was all those years ago. It keeps the same general structure of the original. It doesn't really deviate or try to change all things too much, and instead expand on what made them work in the first time. From the fight scenes and how close they actually resemble to the originals, to even certain events and how little they actually change. The best example is when Metal-X fights Yoshi, or rather, massacres him. In the original series, Metal Sonic definitely beats up Yoshi to a pulp, and that's been ingrained in our memory ever since. Everyone goes, "Oh man, Metal Sonic is savage, look at this, oh my god, whoa!" But here, he just demolishes him. There is no mercy. He does feel like a machine with a clear goal in mind to just retrieve the Chaos Emeralds at any means necessary. It just plays up with the brutality and unnecessary means to an end. Also, there's just a good amount of new interpretations of the same scenes as before that just emphasize it even further. And you know what? Screw it. Let's talk about the fight scenes. They're amazing, but why are they amazing? What made them work so well? Because they're cool. I know a lot of people will say, well, it's the choreography but I'm a simple man and being cool is also important. Without being cool, there's a lack of oomph to your action. It makes your things pop out more. From the Yoshi using the Chaos Emerald to fight back, to Metal-X grabbing Yoshi's tongue and swinging it around like a yo-yo, to the best scene in the episode by bar none. There's a lot of inspiration from Dragon Ball Z and fighting games as a whole. We'll focus on the rule of cool since it's flashy and it helps pull people in the first place. Even Monty Ohm shows how far the rule of cool can go with his fight scenes, and Mark knew this as this series is actually dedicated to him and Satoru Iwata. This shows such a respect to the original show that any person making a reboot should try to replicate, as well as expand on the stuff that worked in the first time around. That is not to say that there is nothing original here, because I'd be dead wrong. Some of the most prevalent changes here is Eggman being revealed early on, as well as the Warrior Brothers being more active in the story, which are welcome changes here. Let's start off with Eggman, who was pretty obvious in the original, but still leaves a lot of questions to newcomers and old-time fans alike, such as, why is Eggman here? How did he survive Metal-X? Will he try to work with Sonic, or will Sonic try to kill him? Honestly, I would love to see more of that parallel format that was used with explaining the Chaos Emeralds in the first place. It was really well done and it would be a good way to see Eggman's side to Metal Sonic's backstory since he was his creator and all. The Warrior Brothers being a more active force here also makes the race to the Chaos Emeralds even more chaotic for the future when new threats arrive and are established. Such as episode 6, baby, I'm still excited for that. God damn, the animation is so good! The way these characters move and fight are top notch. The improvement is staggering and it really helps with all the modular sprites used. Get into the nitty gritty and really getting the bang for your buck with new original sprites used and created just for the show. The fights give a great mood to whether they're funny or just a massacre, and it really does feel closer to Dragon Ball Z and the inspirations it tried to do in the original, such as what Mark intended, and all with sprite animation no less, full of pre-made assets that make this even more impressive since this is a restricted form. Since you don't have to rely on drawing skills or talent, you could just take from the files and just put them on Adobe. That kind of restriction allows to make the most of what you're given and work on from there, which I believe is a main appeal to sprite animation as a whole. It's one of the most simplest to understand, but hell of a master from my own experience. I mean, look at this. I was so proud of this, but now looking back on it, I'm like, wow, this is kind of garbage compared to what these guys are making. Either way, whether you're watching episode 1 or 2 of this reboot, you'll be watching some neato stuff. Also, I really admire how Mark was able to capture these characters so well. Sonic feels cool, Shadow is efficient, Luigi is a coward, and Mario is just a goody two-shoes that everyone likes. I really admire how well Mark captures the game's tone, being bouncy and fun as a Mushroom Kingdom should be, and not having Mario speak. You do not know how common it is to see that, and this is no shame to the people who do this, but it's always jarring to me personally when I see Mario talk, or I see a lot of things that just don't fit the Mushroom Kingdom like gore, because it kinda breaks the illusion of the show to me. It's nice to see the series respect the world while doing its own interpretation through its lore and scenarios. There's a reason why the original kicked off an entire community that's still going strong to this day, and it's even more prevalent here. I'm a bit nervous in how episode 3 will be handled because it's kind of a dark episode if you guys know what happens in the original, and it wasn't really an episode but rather a flashback in the original, so it's either gonna be a make or break moment for me, but based on what I've seen here, I got little to worry about, and this series has a pretty bright future ahead of it. Be sure to check out Mark's Twitter for updates behind the scenes and other neat stuff. Also, if you want to donate to him while not actually contributing to the series because that's kind of illegal, you can donate a coffee to Mark Haynes' coffee page.